Uh, Dear ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome to the 2022 International Open Seminar on Semiotics, a tribute to John Deely on the 5th anniversary of his passing. My name is Yulia Nikitenko. Our seminar is a collaborative international open scientific initiative that connects a network of dozens of organizations and scholars around the world. The sessions will run throughout all the year, so follow please our schedule on our webpage. And we are joining here to examine the theory of the sign in its development, as well as to explore new approaches into its interdisciplinary potential of semiotics. Today's presentation belongs to a historical model and will reveal some connections between French-Lithuanian semiotician Algirdas Julien Greimas and Russian philosopher Lev Karsavin. Our speaker today is Professor Inna Merkulova. Thank you very much for joining us, and let me please introduce you. Dr. Inna Gennadievna Merkulova, PhD in linguistics and semiotics, is an associate professor, founder, and director of the International Center for Semiotics and Intercultural Dialogue of the State Academic University for Humanities in Moscow, and also general editor of the Russian Semiotic Almanac. Dr. Merkulova is an associate researcher at the Sense Text Informatics History Laboratory of Sorbonne University. She is also representative of Russia on the executive board of the International Association for Semiotic Studies. In 2011 since 2011 up to 2017, she headed the Science and Education Department at the Russian Center for Science and Culture in Paris. After her PhD thesis on graphics and enunciation, supervised by Jacques Fontenille, she focuses her research on literary semiotics, intercultural dialogue, theory, and theory of translation. Dr. Merkulova is also an author of the project Semiotic, Start Semiotic Day, which is an international day for students of semiotic. She has a lot of publications and is an active translator of from French to Russian and from Russian in French also. Among her most recent publications are Semiotics, Graphics, and Enunciation in Contemporary French Prose, appeared in Moscow, and also New Normality, New Life Forms, Semiotics and the Era of Crises, appeared also in Moscow last year. She translated the book from Russian to French, the book Culture and Explosion by Yuri Lotman. And I would like also to remark that very recently, in this year, appeared her translation of Greimas' text on imperfection, which was translation from French to Russian. So, Inna Gennadievna, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the presentation, dear Yulia. Good afternoon and good evening also, dear colleagues. Many thanks to the organizers for this invitation on the online seminar on semiotics. It's a great honor and a pleasure for me. And I also thank all colleagues and friends who are present today. Thank you. At the opening of this seminar on January 7th, I already said that I belong to two semiotic traditions, the Moscow Tartu School of Semiotics of Culture Lotman and the Paris Semiotic School, Greimas and his disciples. Since I wrote a double doctoral dissertation, PhD, at the University of Limoges and the Moscow Institute of Linguistics of the Russian Academy of Sciences. In addition, I can say that the International Center for Semiotics and Intercultural Dialogue, which I had at my university in Moscow, State Academic University for the Humanities, Galgon, organizes semiotic events, but also translates books and articles of Western semioticians into Russian. For example, we publish a new series of collections, Russian Semiotic Almanac, and I show you the latest publications, the book New Normality, New Life Form Semiotics in the Era of Crisis, collective publication with semioticians from Europe, Asia, Latin America, Middle East, and Australia. This is this book. And the article for a perspectival anthroposemiotics by the French semiotician Jacques Montagnier. This is this publication. These are multilingual publications in the original languages, French, English, Spanish, and also translated into Russian at the same time in Russian and in original. So, our latest publications. And these publications are available in electronic form on the website of the Socio-Humanitarian Archive of the Russian Academy of Sciences and our University Galgon. And taking this opportunity, I would like to invite interested colleagues to cooperate, and we will be happy to publish your articles translated into Russian in our collection. And I'll write the details in the chat if you are interested. So now I will launch my presentation. Just a moment. Is it okay? Nice. Thank you. The semiotics of the Greimas school is close to me not only as a scientist, but also thanks to the translation into Russian of his semiotic works. My latest translation is the book on imperfection, and it was this translation that became the basis of my today's speech to you. So, we will talk about the dialogue of two dimensions, semiotic and philosophical. We analyze a little-known article, The Presentiment of Perfection, of Algirdas Julien Greimas, a French-Lithuanian semiotician, about his relationship with the Russian philosopher, poet, and historian medievalist Lev Karsavin, who was his professor at the Lithuanian University in Kaunas in the 1930s. Modern semiotics, as a science of science, communicative systems, and the manifestation of meaning, is distinguished by an interdisciplinary approach, and in this sense, it continues the traditions established in the 20th century by the Tartu Moscow School and Paris School. Outstanding Russian philologist and semiotician Vyacheslav Всеволодовich Ivanov noted that semiotics should help us navigate history. Different approaches may be complementary to each other and make it easier to create a common picture of the science and texts that make up the history of human culture. The founder of the Tartu Moscow Semiotic School, Yuri Lotman, also wrote about the importance of the relationship between history and semiotics. In his opinion, the task of historical science is to restore the past as it really was. However, unlike the deductive sciences, the historian deals with texts, and a text is always created by someone and for some purpose, and events are presented in the text in an encoded form. So, the historian acts as a decoder, trying to extract the event itself from the story of the event. And here, semiotics can help him by reconstructing the code used by the author of the text and its correlation with the researcher's code. This is the so-called retrospective view of the historian. In this context, the history of semiotics as a discipline acquires a special significance. The genesis of ideas, the analysis of contacts and connections between its representatives from different countries have become extremely important. In 2017, 5 years ago, a large number of international semiotic congresses in Paris at UNESCO, in Moscow, in Kaunas, were dedicated to the centenary of the founder of the Paris Semiotic School, Algirdas Julien Greimas. He was born in revolutionary 1917 in Russia in Tula. After his family returned to Lithuania, he began his career as a law student in the 1930s at the Lithuanian University in Kaunas. Then there was an internship in linguistics at the University of Grenoble, return to Vilnius, the Second World War, and the final emigration to France, where he met Barthes, Lévi-Strauss, and created his own school of semiotics, whose followers developed the discipline today all around the world, in Europe, Asia, Latin America, Russia. Now I will show you a photo of Greimas' great book. Just a moment. How it will be. Okay, great book at the University of Kaunas, Jan Greimas in 1934. And this is a list of the disciplines he studied at the University of Kaunas. At my request, copies of these documents were sent to me from Lithuania by Professor Vincent. In 2022, the semiotic community will celebrate a number of memorable dates. Of course, John Deely, the first anniversary of his passing and the 80th anniversary of his arrival, the centenary of Lotman's birth, and the 105th anniversary of the birth of Greimas. Until now, the fact that during his studies in Kaunas, Greimas attended the lectures of the Russian philosopher Lev Karsavin was practically unknown. After the revolution in Russia, Karsavin, a professor at St. Petersburg University and the brother of the ballerina Tamara Karsavina, immigrated to France and then to Lithuania, gaining a professor's position at the Department of World History of the Lithuanian University in Kaunas. In detail, a few biographical facts. Karsavin was expelled from Soviet Russia in November 1922. Together with a group of 45 scientists and cultural figures like Berdyaev, Frank, Ilyin, Losky, Bulgakov, Trubetskoy, great philosophers and others, and members of their families. In Berlin, he was one of the organizers, then an employee of the Russian Scientific Institute. Since 1926, in Clamart, near Paris, he headed the Eurasian Seminar in Paris. In 1929, he was a member of the editorial board and the author of the newspaper Eurasia. In 1927, Karsavin refused the offer of Sviatopolk-Mirsky to teach at Oxford, but accepted an invitation to work at the Department of World History of the University of Lithuania in Kaunas. So in 1928-1940, he taught, since 1929, in Lithuanian language at the Lithuanian University in Kaunas, and with the transfer of the latter to Vilnius, at Vilnius University. In 1944, he was suspended from teaching at the university. In 1949, he was dismissed from the Art Institute, arrested, accused of participating in the Eurasian movement, and sentenced to 10 years in labor camps. Lev Karsavin died in prison in the village of Acesa in 1950. In addition to books in Russian about personality, 1929, poem about death, the philosopher published in Lithuanian, Theory of History, 1929, a fundamental 5-volume study, History of European Culture, and some essays on perfection, as well as Spirit and Body, tertiums on art, written in the camp in Lithuanian language. And all these essays were published only in the 80s of the 20th century. In French, there is a translation of Karsavin's Poem of Death, published by the L'Âge d'Homme publishing house. In 1996, a special issue of the magazine Revue des Études Slaves was published, dedicated to Lev Karsavin with quotes from the article on perfection. However, there is no complete translation of On Perfection into French or English. Just a moment. Okay. Analyzing documents from the archives of the Vilnius National Library, we have found a special issue of magazine Согласие, The Consent, published in 1991, dedicated to Karsavin. Greimas' article, The Presentiment of Perfection, The Relevance of Karsavin, a short page-sized text, was also published in this issue. In the same year, a Lithuanian version of this article by Greimas was published in Vilnius. We translated this article into French for the Congress and UNESCO dedicated to Greimas centenary, and we would like to thank our scientific director, Jacques Fontagny, Professor Thomas Broden, author of the exhibition Greimas Childhood, Rimtautas Kašponis, for their help in preparing this translation, and also Professor Teresa Greimas for her attention. And this translation, this historical evidence, arose to a great interest in his disciples and the representatives of the Parisian school. So this French translation of the article of Greimas was published in the Revue Russe in Paris in 2017 after the Congress. This is the review with the publication. Now I will show you some documents. This is a copy of the issue of the journal with the article by Greimas, The Consent. So you can see the journal, the first page, the Consent with the picture of Karsavin, and then the article of Greimas, the picture of Karsavin, the article written and published in Russian with the name of Greimas, Algirdas Julien Greimas here, On Perfection. This is the copy on the presentation. So on the presentiment of perfection, the relevance of Karsavin. So after the publication of our translation into Russian of the book by Algirdas Julien Greimas and Jacques Fontagny, The Semiotics of Passions from States of Affairs to States of Feeling, in 2007, second edition in 2015, we worked on the translation into Russian of On Perfection. This is the original, and the translation published will be available in Moscow very soon. So while working on the text, we have found that the book was written by Greimas under the influence of Karsavin's ideas. Therefore, it seems interesting to us to draw a parallel between Greimas' study on imperfection, 1987, and Karsavin's essay on perfection, 1952. Perhaps when Greimas writes, I brought almost everything from Lithuania, including the understanding of the Scandinavian and Slavic soul, he also speaks of the impression that the lectures of the outstanding Russian philosopher Karsavin made on him. In the article The Presentiment of Perfection, dedicated to the Russian philosopher, Greimas writes that for Karsavin, a presentiment of perfection is the first step into the world of values. Greimas discovers Karsavin's essay on perfection, originally written in Lithuanian and published shortly before in Vilnius, and it becomes an occasion to remember the years of youth at the university and the lessons, the conference of his teacher, which greatly influenced Greimas' career choice and his interests in Middle Ages. Tres faciunt collegium, Karsavin said, as in the memorable times of the Middle Ages, glancing at two students who just came in to listen to him after he sat down and began the lecture. And now, I want the three of us, Karsavin, me, and you, my dear reader, to sit down and have a friendly conversation about a person and about life. I was young and stupid, interested in everything but not in law, which I had to study. Having accidentally met Karsavin, I was captivated by his beautiful, cultured speech. I would never have thought that in Lithuanian one could speak so elegantly about rational subjects. I was captivated, understanding almost nothing about it, by the beauty of the ideas he expounded. As if by accident, I fell in love with the Middle Ages, and later I even became something of a medievalist. Then Greimas confesses to his readers. Like his teacher, Karsavin, he reflected on the problem of perfection and imperfection and wrote a book on imperfection, which he considers as a spiritual testament to posterity. The more surprising, the book comes out at the same time when the work of Karsavin began to be published again and became known to the European reader. And here is the last amazing coincidence. Having decided to sing my swan song in short text and calling it on imperfection, then I was pleasantly surprised to learn about Karsavin's recently found latest work, entitled On Perfection. Of course, Greimas writes, Karsavin and he are disproportionate. It would never have occurred to me to compare myself with such a person like Lev Karsavin. However, using this his very lofty right to coincidentia oppositorum, he suggests that even if there were no approaches and results, at least the intentions could be similar. In fact, while I, having stuck in a swamp of imperfections, can only dream of an inattainable, perfect being, for Karsavin, imperfection itself inevitably leads to perfection. A presentiment of perfection is already the first step into the world of values. The book on imperfection is an original dialogue with Karsavin's concepts. To fit the whole Philosophia Perennis into 30 pages, drawing for oneself through the whole history of philosophy a narrow and slippery path between mysticism and rationalism, leave the ruins of this metaphysics, taking with him only a few basic principles, and accept a person in all his imperfections, pathetically characterizing his life in intonations close to Kierkegaard and Unamuno. Painful doing nothing. Rejecting traditional Christian theology, no longer offer the theology of man's salvation, but the theology of his deification. Such is the scale of Karsavin, such is his path, according to. Perfection is the completeness, the universality of all that was, is, and will be, the universality of being. Greimas quotes the Russian philosopher. The philosophical thinking immediately indicated a possible way to read it. From metaphysical heights, Karsavin offers another version of the great classical philosophical systems. The fullness of being is justified by the unity hiding under the plurality. The mobility of being is explained by its timelessness. The affirmation of the existence of being is complemented by the properties of abstract space and transcendental time. According to Greimas, it seems enough to decorate this whole superposition of concepts with the label of God, and the problem of perfection will be completely resolved. Speaking about Karsavin's article, which Greimas read in Lithuanian, and which was originally written in Lithuanian, it is interesting, I think, to quote the opinion of Asia Kovtun, a translator from Lithuanian into Russian, translator of Karsavin. Speaking about this article, the language of this article once again confirms that being is identified with the word. The article is very clear, transparent. There are many terms of Russian discourse, so the translation is very similar to the reconstruction of the text. But it is clear that this is written by a Russian-speaking person in a refined literary Lithuanian language. The Lithuanian language of his time was not yet really ready for scientific thought, especially such a complex one. And with Karsavin, every word is in its place. When translating, even a rearrangement of words is not needed. Everything is so clear. After all, the language of the intellect is universal. In his analysis, the French semiotician observes one of the main problems of Karsavin's essay, the image of I. Starting epistemology, Karsavin immediately raises the problem of the relationship between a subject and an object, a person and a world, discarding not only extreme disconnection, but also the mystical fusion of the subject with the outside world. He raises a question not of subjective or objective being, but of the subjectification or objectification of phenomena, introducing the currently relevant principle of the subject's participation in the creation of the world. This allows him to speak of subjective being, of self-knowledge, as the ability of the subject to know himself as an object. In Greimas' terms, such ontologization of the subject allows us to identify the subject, to approach the problem of the self, moving from the everyday I to the I of family, the nation, and finally to the I of humanity. Thus, Karsavin clearly shows his preoccupation for the problems of individualization, the construction of the identity of society and of the individual. If we look now at the original source, Karsavin's essay on perfection, published in Russian in 2004, we will see the transition described in detail by the philosopher from one aspect of this I to another. Imagine ourselves, we stabilize it and limit it. We consider it as a constant value. Many people think naively that the I is a soul separate from its moment and unchanging, but unfortunately, constantly running away from the mind and one that cannot be comprehended and described. But in reality, our I is constantly changing. Here, It narrows, concentrates, and falls down, turns into a small, self-enclosed, littered with small utilitarian affairs, ordinary eye. And there it pulsates, expands, and rises, turns into the eye of its family, nation, even humanity, the world. Karsavin, 2004 edition. In his article, The Relevance of Karsavin, Greimas also describes the mythological thinking of the Russian philosopher, emphasizing a topic interesting to him. His book about the Lithuanian mythology of gods and men was devoted to these issues. By agreeing to descend from transcendental heights to the everyday life of the subject and generally accepted ways of thinking, Karsavin completes his Copernican revolution, becoming a thinking person from a classical philosopher. The fact that Karsavin turns to mythology in search of similar patterns of thinking, that in ethnology he finds a different logic of participation, that along with discursive thinking he equally recognizes intuitive thinking, all this reveals to us the image of another Karsavin, more human, according to Greimas, more human, who consciously refuses abstract theoretical metaphysics. All the problems consciously put forward and studied by him, by Karsavin, are in fact aporias, only abscesses on the body of genuine philosophy. To philosophize, therefore, means only to pose questions to which there is no answer. Greimas' book on imperfection is based on the same idea as Karsavin's book. Imperfection itself leads to perfection. The book contains several parts where, using the semiotic method, literary texts are analyzed. Each chapter is accompanied by an original title. For example, The Fracture, Dazzle, Hero Robinson, Friday of Tournier, Lo Guizzo, Hero Mr. Palomar of Calvino, The Smell of Jasmine, Rilke, The Color of Darkness, Tanizaki in Praise of Shadows, A Hand, A Chic, Cortázar, Ceremonies, Lufos, Immanence of the Sensible, Schiller, A Foreclosed Aesthetics, Balzac and Baudelaire, The Expectation of the Unexpected, and Conclusion. And we would like to quote here two fragments of Greimas' book, Imperfection, in our working translation into English. Of course, the main language of translation is Russian. Clearly expressing his style as a semiotician and as a philosopher and poet. Color of Darkness, Tanizaki. Have you ever, reader, seen The Color of Darkness by candlelight? It differs from the darkness of the twilight on the road. It seems to consist of the smallest particles, as it from the ashes, where each element carries a rainbow. It seemed to me that these particles of ash were about to hit my eyes, and against my will, I squinted. Greimas' comment. So, we better understand the meaning of the generalized approach to the object. The darkness that arises in the form of a set of particles produced black matter, which at a phenomenal level appears to us as an aesthetic object. As you know, the artist gets black by mixing on his palette primitive colors, yellow, blue, and red. I was also told that a Chinese paint seller, if asked to sell black ink, will definitely tell you which black color you need, black red or black blue. In other words, black is the absence of color, is an explosive presence that it is hidden in this black color. perfect twilight virtually conceals in itself all the colors, all the beauty of the world. This is a prototype color. Therefore, it is not surprising that the energy of each particle of black embosoms a rainbow, and that the object appears before us as an indicator of the innermost corners of our existence. And another fragment from conclusion of On Imperfection. The desire to express the ineffable and portray the unimaginable, evidence that one thing, one of a kind, came to this world, and that another thing became possible. Nostalgia and expectations feed the world of our imagination. Attempts to subjugate our daily routine or to run away from it are in vain. So the desire for the unexpected becomes apparent. And at the same time, the so-called aesthetic values are the only true ones, because only they lift us up. Imperfection turns into a springboard from which we rush from insignificance to meaning. What is left for us? Innocence. A dream of returning to the origins, to the moment when man and the world were one primordial whole. Or true hope, the expectation of a unique aesthetic moment, a dazzle that does not require us to close our eyes. Analyzing Karsavin's essay in the article The Presentiment of Perfection, Greimas, in a concentrated version, presents his philosophical understanding of the pair of perfection, imperfection, set described in the conclusion of the book On Imperfection. In the present, that is, the all-time state of a person is much better determined by the desire of a person than by his doing nothing, which is a state of immobility. According to Karsavin, a person's true problem is not to be or not to be, but to want or not want to. That is, the state is not a static position, but a dynamic stress. Man has been given understanding of perfection from God. Therefore, his existence, that half existence, when he wants and does not want to be perfect enough, is nothing more than nonsense that has become reality. This presentiment of perfection is already the first step into the world of values. The choice of metaphors is not so important. We can talk about languishing for the Superman, or about the constant deification of the cold one. It is enough to see once these shadows of values so that they would be able to formalize being, and why not, so that the word became flesh. The article, The Presentiment of Perfection, the Relevant of Karsavin, was written by Greimas in March 1991, less than a year before his death, and 4 years after the publication of the book On Imperfection in the French publishing house Fanlac. If the article is a detailed analysis of the basic principles of Karsavin's philosophy, the book is an indirect appeal to the concepts of Karsavin by analyzing literary examples. This is a conversation, I could say an imaginary dialogue between two scientists over a distance and decades, in which Greimas appears not only as a semiotician, linguist, mythologist, but also as a philosopher. The distinguishing feature of Greimas' Semiotics, which he defined as a project, is its dialogic nature. According to the authors of the special issue of Science System Studies, such framing means defining his work on semiotics as a continuous process and positioning it as an existential undertaking that cannot be separated from one's relationship with the surrounding world and the desire to understand its workings. Grigorieva, Graminias, Olupere, 2017. Greimas, calling his work a semiotic project, like Karsavin, puts the idea of development. According to Karsavin, evolutio, development, in first place. Karsavin, 2011 reedition. And this final book on imperfection, this small final book, which has grown significantly in the scientific community in recent years, is in fact a confirmation of this dialogue with Karsavin about the humanistic values of human life. I could say the dialogue with the other science of meaning, according to Fontagny, 2017. With Lev Karsavin, the Russian philosophical school abroad had an impact on the development of modern semiotics through the school of Greimas and his followers around the world. And in this slide, you see several illustrations. The covers of the book, Semiotics of Passions in Russian, on imperfection, original in French and also Russian translation. Letter from Greimas to Ivan Daroharis in May 1991, just after the publication of this article on Karsavin. Photo of our colloquium in Moscow for the 90th anniversary of the birth of Greimas and for the publication in Russian of Semiotics of Passions with the participation of Russian, French, Lithuanian, and Italian semioticians. And this is a collection of conference colloquium papers in Russian, English, and French, headlined Modern Semiotics and the Humanities, available in Russian and with abstracts and some articles original languages. At the same conference in Moscow, we showed a unique exhibition, Greimas' Childhood. And this is Professor Kashboni's book about this exhibition with the photo of Greimas, Greimas young, and Greimas in Paris. This book also contains a photo of one of the semiotic congresses of the International Association for Semiotic Research in Nanjing, in China, in 2012. And I remember many excellent conferences of semioticians around the world. And you can see also prospect of this exhibition, Greimas with his mother, Greimas' childhood. And in conclusion, returning to the history of the discipline itself, we would like to refer to the words of Greimas' disciples, who are developing semiotics in France and in Finland today. Eero Tarasti from the University of Helsinki looks at the history of semiotics. What made semiotics something new in the 1960s, in the glorious days of structuralism, when it became institutionalized? On the one hand, traditional high culture topics in the arts, history, mythology, and cultural heritage were studied from radically new viewpoints of information theory, linguistics, cybernetics, and computer studies. These new viewpoints and frames of reference provided these topics with an estrangement effect, such that they were suddenly seen in a totally new light, as fulfilling the epistemic ideals of efficiency, formalization, and structural analysis. On the other hand, the study of popular, low culture, phenomena, and leisure arts, such as cinema, advertising, fashion, food, and media, with a rigorous and formal discourse, elevated all those to a status of sublime and noble objects, worthy of serious academic study. Tarasti, 2009. Jacques Fontanier, University of Limoges, moves from history to the current state of science and poses a radical question. What is the place of semiotics and its application in universities? In his opinion, in any field of knowledge, there is no scientific research outside institutes and universities, and even the most independent individualistic researchers cannot do without institutes that organize congresses and colloquiums, create journals and series of publications. The measurement of the institutionalization of a discipline for the purpose of teaching is the existence of a certain doctrine common to certain scientific cycles. However, being initially a specific and independent scientific project, semiotics exists immediately between several paradigms. Some theoretical movements arise and disappear, others expand and transform. In addition, being at the intersection of many disciplines, semiotics itself participates in the evolution of these disciplines. If today the task is to develop a complete educational program on semiotics, we will be able to reach consensus using the text of the founding authors of the discipline: Saussure, Peirce, Hjelmslev, Benveniste, Greimas, Lotman, Eco. Paying tribute to the founders of semiotics, in particular Greimas, it needs to pay attention to the functioning of science in the institutes that we created to continue his work, whether it is in research laboratories, training programs, participation in international competitions, or the formation of a theoretical and methodological base. I think that saluting Greimas is not only to remember him. It would be a profound mistake to consider a tribute to the founder teacher, the opinion that his scientific thought would be preserved through the endless reproduction of itself using past working methods. Today, it would be much more convincing to propose an institutional organization on the basis of which Greimas' thought could live and develop in the future. Fontanier, 2013. Remember the roots and connections of semiotics with other disciplines, the polemics and common ground in different approaches of scientists. We hope that our study of the scientific dialogue between Greimas and Karsavin will make a modest contribution to this task. And now I would like to show a small fragment from Marina Merkulova's documentary, Semiotics of the 21st Century. This film will be screened this year at some semiotic events. And in this fragment, we are talking about a visit to the National Library of Lithuania in Vilnius and our work with documents there, the article of Greimas dedicated to Karsavin. And you will also see footage of the opening of the exhibition dedicated to the centenary of Greimas at the Lithuanian Embassy in Moscow, where I presented my research. So just a moment, I'll show the video. Is it okay? You can see the screen? Okay.
В одной из работ Инны Меркуловой она доказывает гипотезу о влиянии на идеи Гreimas'а русского философа Льва Карсавина, лекции которого Гreimas посещал в юности. Подтверждение этому мы нашли в архивах городской библиотеки Вильнюса. Архивные документы из жизни Греймаса увидели и посетители выставки к столетию ученого, которую открыли в посольстве Литвы в Москве. На плакатах фото разных лет. Инсталляция. Фигурка любимого питомца Греймаса Рудиса. Каштанки, если по-русски.
Я пришла к этой науке, изначально я лингвист, и, собственно, эту науку я открывала именно там, в Парижской семиотической школе, когда ходила на семиотический семинар, его создавал еще Гreimas, а сегодня его продолжают его ученики, которые не только французы, там много представителей других европейских стран.
Was just a fragment. So thank you very much for your attention. Obrigada. And if you have questions, I will be happy to answer. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Inna Gennadievna, for your insightful talk and for sharing with us all these materials. It was very curious to see, and I suppose they are not very easy accessible. So thank you very much. And now I would like to introduce Alexandre Sbabo and invite him to give his comment after I will make a short introduction. So Dr. Sbabo has a double degree, double PhD in language sciences from the University of Limoges, France, and in communication and semiotics from the Pontifical Catholic University of São Paulo, Brazil. His PhD thesis aims to build a diachronic path on the articulations between aesthetics and ethics in the semiotics of Greimas. Nowadays, he is temporary research associate at University Paris-Est Créteil and is an associate member of the Center for Social Semiotics Research in Brazil. As well as of the Center for Studies of Discourse, Images, Texts, and Communication in France. Centre d'études de discours, images, textes écrits et communication. He is responsible for the communication of Romance Federation of Semiotics. And we are very thankful to him to be present and to share his expertise with us. Thank you. Dr. Sbabo, it's now your turn.
Thank you very much. Well, first of all, I would like to thank the event organizers for the invitation to participate in this beautiful seminar and to apologize for my English, as it has been a long time since I had the opportunity to practice it. Secondly, I would like to congratulate them for the organization and the richness of the interventions. And since we are talking about the importance of interventions, I would also like to take this opportunity to thank Inna Merkulova for this brilliant presentation that we had the pleasure of listening to. A presentation that undoubtedly invites us to think about the multiple aspects of the relationship between Greimas semiotics and Karsavin's philosophy. A relationship that goes from the context of intimacy and personal life to the world of ideas, in which the perenniality of existence does not seem to coexist in the same space-time. We say this because Inna Merkulova's works shows exactly this movement from learning and inspiration in the university bank to the development of a methodology. And in the midst of all this journey, the emergency of a common concern for the two authors, that is the meaning of life. Honestly, what most challenges me in the presented work is the strength that it has to make us questioning our all academic path. The fact that we can study for years the theories of our disciplines or their respective authors without being able to exhaust their influences is something that has always caught my attention. And this is exactly what Ina's presentations evoke. I confess that before having contact with this work, I had no idea of the relationship between Karsavin and Greimas. Neither in his first text published in 1943, Cervantes on his Don Quixote, nor in his theoretical books, Greimas mentions the name of his teachers. In his first article of 1956, he mentions with euphoria his contact with socio-linguistic theory, but still does not mention Karsavin. In this sense, what Ina presents us allows us to open the new doors in the understanding of the French semiotics. In other words, the work presented allows us to glimpse a new perspective of investigation in semiotic research. As you should know, a few researchers don't consider structural semantics as a semiotic book, a thesis that I completely disagree with. The same happened with imperfection. For many years, it was considered a kind of daydream of the Lithuanian author, a book of literature and not a semiotics book. The work we listed reinforces the idea that despite appearances and its pleasant reading, on imperfection, it is a semiotics book. More precisely, a semiotic term that summons us to leave the text on the utterances which are closed in themselves to the lived world, the world of sensitive experience, the world in which we live. A world where the ethics and aesthetics of the individual are in constant conflict with the social morality and the notion of beauty, where imperfection consists in this eternal search for meaning, and the perfection is the image of completeness, of a fusion of the individual and the world. In this context, the arguments presented partially convince us that Cartesian philosophy seems to have influenced Greimas' thinking. This influence shows up like that old teacher who seduced us with his intelligence, and that in the end, we ended up carrying as a reference for our entire lives. In this sense, I would like to make a small extrapolation of the work presented and invite Ina to reflect with me. But before I begin, I would like to ask Ina to correct me if I'm wrong in my propositions, because, as I said, I'm very far from being able to assume my propositions regarding Karsavin's work. From the little I know of Karsavin, at the time he was professor of Greimas in Kaunas, he was the head professor of universal history on top of the course on Christian philosophy in the Middle Ages. And this fact seems to transform the entire epistemological relationship between the two authors. We say this because in 1966, Greimas writes an article entitled Structure and History, in which he highlights that historical algorithms present themselves as a fixed state, that is, as a static structure. This approach of history as a specific moment of the categories of space and time also seems to me to be the perspective adopted by Karsavin. In the first volume of his work entitled History of European Civilization, the author shows us that for him, the most important thing of history is not that which has a general character, but that which is concrete, individual. In this way, in the historical process, he was not interested in causal relations, but in isolated moments. These isolated moments that define Karsavin's historical approach seem, in this sense, to dialogue with the fixed state of historical moments observed as static structures of which Greimas speaks. However, we cannot be fooled by appearances. Greimas' view of the study of meaning, of historical facts, was equally in communion with socio-synchronic thought. In fact, this was one of the greatest revolutions provided by modern linguistics. That is, comparing what is comparable. Evidently, neither Greimas nor Saussure denies the importance of diachronic research. But as the apprehension of meaning takes place at the moment of its manifestation, and this also happens in historical texts, meaning can only become apprehensible from the synchronic aspect, that is, in relation to the other elements that compose it. And at this point, the things can begin to become more complex, because on imperfection is at the same time a testament and a supplementary stage in semiotics research, marking a continuity in Greimas' epistemological building. In this sense, we can say today that Saussure influenced Greimas' thinking. If we can say that, it's because we recognize it in the continuity of semiotic methodology. We can clearly observe that the methodological choices made by Greimas are based on Saussure's proposals. However, even if we voluntarily recognize in own imperfection that the proximity of the themes can demonstrate a possible influence of Karsavin's philosophy on the thought of Greimas, such a conclusion seems a little bit hasty. Well, even if I admit that my comments may seem a little rude, in fact, what they hide is a desire to know more about this relation. As I said at the beginning of my speech, your work opens us a new path of investigation to better understand Greimas' thinking. Therefore, I would like to end my comments by asking a question and by a suggestion. My question is very simple. Do you intend to continue researching this possible influence? If so, what paths do you envision in order to confirm or refute such a hypothesis? I ask this question because my suggestion is in the same direction. As I have tried to show earlier, the predilection for approaching history as a static structure at the moment of its apprehension is a position that seems to be shared by both Greimas, Saussure, and Karsavin. In this context, I would like to see a continuity of your research, but this time also exploring the possibility of a cohabitation or a dialogue between the perspective of Saussure and Karsavin, especially regarding the synchronic approach of phenomena. I think that this path would make it possible to build a solid theoretical foundation that is effectively capable of demonstrating in the continuity of Greimas' thought the influence of Karsavin's philosophy, and thereby justify Greimas' concern with the meaning of things and life. I thank you once again for your presentation and for the opportunity to debate freely and honestly with you. Thank you very much, Ina.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Alexander, for your comment. Very inspiring and very important, really very, very important for me. I will start with your question, maybe. So, of course, for me, it was really a discovery of this new door, this direction, this relation between Greimas and Karsavin and I intend, of course, to continue my new article on this topic will be published soon in Science System Studies. And also I will really think on your suggestion on cohabitation and dialogue of Socio and Karsavin. Yes, of course. And on the other hand, speaking about history and historical approach, if we think about today's situation, which is not ordinary, we are living in historical moment. And for example, I liked very much a comment of Belgian colleague, Belgian semiotician, in this book, New Normality, of Simir Badir. And he writes about our personal stories in this global story of the pandemic. Our personal stories, a bit of personal stories. And I think, yes, it's this importance of isolate moments, like you mentioned. This fact was very central for Karsavin's research in 5 volumes, for example, of European history of European culture. Maybe his personal story was also definitely important in it, because all his life was a concrete story of crisis, of turns, of choices, why he decided to go to Lithuania, no in Great Britain, maybe to study, to become the teacher of Greimas, maybe for this reason. In any case, isolate moments of personal choice were emphasized really by Karsavin in this history of European culture. And maybe another door, another path for research. Of course, on imperfection is so unique, so original, so poetic book, a very serious book of semiotics, of course, but also poetic and philosophical. I remember that Teresa Greimas said me, when you will translate it, you will translate the poesy, don't forget it. So I think another door and another direction that this relation between Greimas and Karsavin could show us is the dimension of the body, bodily semiotics. For example, I like very much this short text of another Belgian semiotician, a disciple of Greimas and also philosopher, a great philosopher, Herman Paret. There are 4 texts in this book, Structuré, and a text about imperfection. And for example, he writes, on imperfection seizes with a subtle and poetic intuition the haptological and synesthetic functioning of the 5 senses, which could lead to a new semioaesthetics, formally established and epistemologically consistent. And on imperfection, we can find really an essential supplement of corporeality. Corporeality as it modeled after by Fontagny in Body and Meaning Correscence. So I think, of course, the example of Paret, it is a comparison between the approach of Paul Valéry and Greimas. But the core of this reflection is the importance of semioaesthetics as a future path of developing the semiotics and the role of the body. And I think that for Karsavin, the role or the importance of the body was omnipresent, because On Perfection is just an essay written in the camp of Abbes. But in parallel, he writes another poem of death. And the poem of death is also a reflection of the body, of somatical reactions, etc. And of course, maybe when he was a teacher of Greimas, when Greimas was young and Karsavin was young, it was not in the same terms that Karsavin could present it. But I think that the main ideas on body, on history, on personal moments, on history, etc., were already presented. And in another paper, Greimas remember Karsavin and writes that I met only 2 persons in my life of this scale of philosopher. I can compare Karsavin and Adorno. Thank you, Alexander, once again.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sbabo. Thank you, Dr. Merkulova, also for your answer. I would like to thank also our dear audience and say that we will now be closing the broadcast, but the session will continue here on Zoom. So that we can take questions and thoughts from the participants who are invited to stay here on Zoom and continue the discussion.